There we go. Okay. All right. We're back. We are frustrated. Been lots of expletives and curse words uttered here. So apologize for once again technical difficulties. We got to figure out why we're struggling as much as we are here. We used to never have any problems at all when we were here, and I don't know that the fact that we're here has anything to do with the problems we're having. But I don't know if we got computer issues or what we got, but it's frustrating. So we lost the original stream. I'm not going to go back through and rehash everything we did in the first 10 minutes on that one. We're just going to pick up and move forward from here. I know we got a lot fewer people with us now, so some of you that were with me before maybe will rejoin, or maybe you may just say the hell with it because it's frustrating and go get some work done. But anyway, we're gonna pick back up. We were starting to talk about the amount of rainfall that we've had since we applied a lot of herbicides and since we applied a lot of nitrogen. So I did a little math on my farms. I've had mostly 7 to 8 inches of rain since the 26th of April on my farms. I know places that had almost that much at one shot. There are places that have had well over 10 inches of rain since herbicides and nitrogen were applied, and the impact of that is not good. So I can't say how much nitrogen we've lost. I can't say how reduced the efficacy of your pre-emergent herbicide program is, but I know there's lots of fields of corn out there that maybe just got planted in the last 2 weeks that already have 4-inch tall newly emerged water hemp and already have grass growing, competing with that newly emerged corn. And those fields probably had a good pre-emergent herbicide program down on them, but too much time and too much moisture has occurred since that application was made, and the effectiveness of those pre-emergent programs is pretty diminished at this point. So the reality is you're going to need to post that cornfield when the corn is smaller than you maybe normally would. And even though that corn is technically, you may say, too small to spray, the weeds are certainly to the stage where they need to be sprayed. And you'll see differences in soil types, differences in weed pressure. I've noticed on my own farm, the better soil parts of the field and the cleaner parts of the field are still clean. The light, I've got some fields with some sandy soils in them, and that herbicide has just been leached through that sand with all the rain that I've had. And there's water hemp growing in those sandy spots as if I had never sprayed anything on that field. You'll also notice a lot of field edges are getting pretty nasty. So the weedy parts of the field and any soils where you might have leached that herbicide further and faster are going to get nasty first. But some considerations to make on those fields: you need to base your herbicide applications more off of weed size than you do off of crop size. So if you've got 4-inch tall water hemp in a field of corn, it's time to be spraying that corn, even if it's spike corn. And there are some things you could do to try to keep that field clean season long. So one good thing is this later planted corn is growing extremely fast. It's going to canopy very fast. It's not going to be very long from 2-leaf corn to V8 corn, where you start to get some good shading and some good canopy, which will help keep that field clean. I would recommend spiking in some additional residual. I know on my own corn at home that I'm spraying that's small, we're putting 3 pint of warrant in with that post-emergent application to give me some more acetochlor. We're putting some atrazine in with that post-emergence application to give me that's trying to do something again. You want this app to make changes to your device? No. Am I still with you?
Before.
Jennifer, this computer needs to go into the shop for some service. Anyway, it keeps trying to update things while we're going here, and I keep saying no, but the first time I said no, it caused a problem, and I just said no again. So we'll see if so far Adam's giving me the thumbs up, so we're going to keep rolling here. So Anyway, back to post-emergence applications. If you are generally speaking corn or beans, if you're spraying earlier post applications than you maybe normally do, meaning you got smaller crop there that's further from canopy, the use of the inclusion of additional residual herbicide, either an acetochlor product, some atrazine in corn, whatever you can get out there that's got some residual activity. Dicamba's got some residual activity. If you're going to spray earlier post, further from crop canopy, additional residual is always a benefit. Last year we had issues with residuals because it was too dry and they didn't get activated. This year we've got issues with residuals because it's too wet and they didn't last as long as we wanted them to. It's honestly easy to see how when some really good post-emergence options became available, people pretty quickly abandoned the use of residual herbicides because residual herbicides they're challenging. They're not as consistent as the post-emergence products. They're not as, they're more impacted by the environment than the post-emergence products are. And we need residual products to be good stewards of weed control and to manage resistant weeds and to manage some of these tough populations of weeds that we have. But I have a little grace for people that 20 years ago decided I'm never using a residual again, because if it's too dry, they don't work. If it's too wet, they don't work. And post-emergence products, as long as you get good coverage and you're using the right rate, the right product, usually you get good kill on stuff. But we're in a situation today where we need both. Sometimes your post doesn't work as good and you need the residual to prop up your program. Sometimes the residual doesn't work as good and you need your post to prop up the program. And sometimes you need additional residual to give you that season-long weed control. So that's the situation we're in today. Be sure when you're doing those early post applications, you've got additional residual in the tank, and hopefully that additional residual will get activated and will keep that field clean until you got a good enough crop canopy there that the crop canopy is what's going to keep the field clean season long. No herbicide lasts season long. Season long weed control is a function of keeping the field clean until you got a canopy, and then the crop canopy is what's going to keep the field clean. Plus the fact that 85% of the weeds germinate early, and at some point there's just not going to be that many more weeds that germinate. So let's talk about nitrogen a little bit. So there's, I think, a lot of people wondering, have I lost nitrogen? The answer to that question is yes. The unknown answer to that question is how much. We used to have some tools that would try to predict nitrogen loss. We don't have those tools anymore because predicting nitrogen loss is extremely difficult, extremely complicated, extremely complex, and inherently not very accurate. You can go out and take soil tests to measure soil nitrate. That tells you some things. It doesn't tell you how much more mineralization you're going to get. If we have absolutely perfect growing conditions from here on out, that's ideal scenario for mineralization. You might not be short on nitrogen. If we have more wet periods where we're losing more nitrogen, if we get dry where mineralization slows down, if there are challenges to the nitrogen cycling of nitrogen in soil, and you've lost, say, 40 units of your applied nitrogen, you might benefit from applying more side dress nitrogen. So I guess if in addition to planting, replanting, spraying, making hay, mowing, all of the other activities you got to do on the farm, if you've got time and ability and equipment to side dress some nitrogen, I would give that some thought. Now, there's different ways to do it. You can use a liquid applicator with a knife and a coulter. You can, some of you got access to wide drop machines. Some of you have done dry broadcast with urea, in standing crop, either by air or by ground. I even know some people that have applied some urea with a drone. That's a long day's work, but it can be done. So there's lots of different ways to get nitrogen on if you think you're short. I would recommend that if you think you want more nitrogen, I would get it on now. I would not wait until it's obvious that you are short. And I would also not intentionally delay and wait till the crop is older. I would take advantage of the good field conditions we've got now. I would get that nitrogen on there. If you want to put it on an extra 45 units, if you want to put it on an extra 60 units, if you want to, I would not apply less than 30 personally. I don't think it's worth driving through the field to put on 30 units of nitrogen. Probably 40 or 45 is the least that I would add if I'm going to add. And depending on how you're going to add that, if you're going to do it with a knife or a coulter, and you're going to inject it in the middle of the row, it's going to be quite a while before that corn plant knows that you put that additional nitrogen out there. If you're doing it with wide drops, it's going to get that nitrogen quicker. So if you're applying with wide drops, you need to wait till bigger corn. You can't do small corn with wide drops. But that nitrogen is going to get to that plant quicker, so it's a little more okay to put nitrogen on big corn that way. If you're going to do it with more of a traditional coulter type application, I would much rather see that on small corn, and that will give that nitrogen time to get into the soil and time for it to move throughout that soil profile, and time for that plant to intercept it before before it runs short and needs it. So just something to think about. We talked a little bit about post spray and soybeans. So seeing lots of big weeds and lots of soybean fields. And obviously, 4-inch tall is about the biggest weed that ideally we want to be trying to take out post emergence in soybeans, regardless of whether you're using dicamba or not, regardless of whether you're using 2,4-D or not. We do not have a product on the market today that is good at killing big glyphosate resistant water hemp. Glyphosate used to be good at killing big water hemp, before most of it was resistant. Now that we're relying on Liberty, dicamba, 2,4-D, other products to take out that water hemp, they need to be small. Yes, sometimes you get lucky and you can kill a foot tall water hemp with dicamba or 2,4-D or Liberty, but I would not count on it. So keep those applications early. Go after those weeds when they're small. If you have to spray twice, so be it. Get that first application on timely, then we've still got time to make a follow-up application if we need to. If we wait till those weeds are huge and we miss them, there's really nothing you can do at that point that's either effective or on label to clean those fields up. Volunteer corn. So that's another thing I'm seeing in most soybean fields. Have enough volunteer corn that somebody's going to want to do something about that. And volunteer corn control has gotten kind of tricky. There's lots of reasons for that. I think the products work just as good as they ever have when they're applied in the manner that they like to be applied. So the way a graminicide likes to be applied is by itself in water with nitrogen and crop oil. That is not the way that with very small droplets. That is not the way that we're generally applying those products. We're generally throwing those products in with the other mix that we're applying, which has about 3 or 4 things going on there that's antagonistic to the performance of those volunteer corn controlling products. Point number 1 is coverage. If you're, especially if you're set up to spray 2,4-D or dicamba and you're trying to not drift, that means you've got very large droplets. That means you've got drift control additives in that spray mix. Both of those things are antagonistic to the poor performance of something like clethodim for control of volunteer corn. Group 15 herbicides. So how many of you are running something like Warrant, something like Zidua or Outlook with your post soybean spray, as you should be? Group 15 chemistry is extremely antagonistic to the performance of clethodim. And growth regulator herbicides, 2,4-D and dicamba, are also antagonistic. So we've got big droplets, poor coverage. We've got no nitrogen in the tank. We've got maybe not exactly the right surfactant system that volunteer corn killer would like. We've got a group 15 herbicide and we've got a growth regulator herbicide. all of those things contribute to why we have to use such a high rate of clethodim to overcome all that antagonism. I know one year I did a program on my farm where I sprayed dicamba, Roundup, and Warrant early post. And then I scheduled a late post application where I came back with just Roundup, some fungicide, and my volunteer corn control product. And in that mix, at that timing, with the application technology we were able to use, I got beautiful, good volunteer corn control at a kind of a normal use rate of the product, because all the antagonistic things were removed from that application. And if you're old enough to remember, which I barely am, but some of you might be old enough to remember how we used to spray the BSF plan in post-control soybeans in the early days of post, when we were using things like Galaxy Blazer and the actual product Post, P-O-A-S-T, not the grass killer, Cefoxidem, I believe, is the active ingredient in that old grass product. You used to make 2 passes. You would spray your broadleaf products, and then in a separate pass, you would spray your grass product, because if you mixed them all together, the grass product didn't work very well. Well, over time, we've gotten lazier and we want to do things in 1 pass, and 2 passes seems to be unnecessary, and it's gotten more expensive to make passes, and we got more things to do, and we're busier, and we got less time. And so we're always trying to do everything in as few passes as possible. And there's trade-offs with that. So if you got volunteer corn, make sure you're addressing it. Make sure you got the right rate, and understand that the right rate to do the job might be higher than you would like, depending on what else you're using with it. So just a shout out, if you've wondered why volunteer corn seems to be so much trouble, that's why. So we've talked about big weeds. We've talked about 14 days left to spray your dicamba. Oh, yes.
We were able to get the public comment period link posted in this second part of this episode.
Okay, good.
One thing to call out, though, is you can't just click it. You have to highlight it.
Okay.
Copy it, and then paste it into a browser.
Okay.
Then it'll get you there.
Okay. So you probably heard what Adam said, but just in case you didn't, he was able to post the link. So I think it was in the first episode of today's episode that we talked about the public comment period for dicamba. Adam posted a link in the chat, but you can't just click on the link in the chat. You have to copy it from the chat and paste it into your browser, and then it will take you to the site that you can. And if that doesn't work for you, contact your FSR and he can email you the link. And you have until June 3rd. If you want your opinion to be heard at EPA about, the benefits you see of being able to use dicamba in some way, shape, or form in soybeans in 2025 and beyond, then get yourself to that website and you can make those public comments until June 3rd. So,
yeah. And it's the portion in the comment period that's go.bayer.com/J44X1.
Okay.
That's the link.
That's the link.
If you wanted to write it up there, you could, because it's pretty short.
Okay.
We figured out a way to shorten up. It's go.
So
go.bayer.com
/J44
X1.
Okay. So that should get you to that site for public comments. Once again, that's go.bayer.com / I might have wrote a backslash. I can't keep my slashes straight.
You got it.
So leaning up and to the right. the way we want to see sales graphs go, up and to the right. J44X1. So that will get you there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about planting windows. This year has been just such a challenge. Started out so perfect, looked like going to be one of those springs, kind of like last year. You could do whatever you want, whenever you wanted. We had a lot of people that were being patient, a lot of people that passed up some of the early planting windows because it just seemed too early. And this is one of those years where it was good to be early for most crops. And I would say the first planting window, and really only Adams territory and some of Carlisle's area took advantage of this first planting window. I mean, when was your first corn planted, Adam? About the 20th of March?
Yeah, the very first that was like around the 21st, 22nd of March.
Yeah. So I would say from the 20th of March-ish through most of the first week of April, there were a lot of days there where we had really good soil conditions for planting. And depending on where you were, every one of those days might have been a good day for planting. And people that were bold enough and willing to take advantage of that early window, and some of you that, in a normal year, usually start planting the last few days of March or first few days of April, this year's window was about a week or 10 days earlier than normal. But if you're used to planting March 29th, what's the difference in March 22nd? It's just a week. So that early planted window, that stuff came up good. We got really good stands out of that. That is today some of the best looking corn in the countryside is guys that took advantage of that early window. Now we'll talk more about what might be in store of the future of that crop. But as far as getting it out of the ground, getting a stand, getting off to a good start, surviving the excessive wetness that came later in April and early in May, the bigger you were, the better off you were. So I would say the second planting window was, there was some rain that occurred there in early April at some point, and we started to dry out for that second window around the 10th or 11th of April. That's when a lot of people, myself included, started planting soybeans. And I see a little bit of there's a little bit of a headbutting going on between corn and beans for these early windows. Some of you are able to, based on equipment and manpower, aggressively plant both crops at the same time. A lot of us can't handle that. You got to kind of pick your battles. You're either going to do early beans or you're not going to do early beans. And if you're doing early beans, you're probably going to do less early corn. And I do think that I was with a grower yesterday that he's not a believer in early beans. He's got late planted beans, but he's got a lot of corn that went in the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th ish of April that looks really good. And he's looking at his neighbors who've got bigger beans than he does, but their corn doesn't look near as good as his. And he feels good about that. I think there's a trade-off there. If you've got your beans in early, I think your beans will be better because you got them in early. But this is a year where some of the early planted corn, looks really, really good because that second window was also a pretty good window to plant corn. And it was also a window that a lot of people didn't plant corn. The third window is the first window in a lot of my area that people planted corn, and that would have been like the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th of April. That turned out to be an awful time to plant corn in a lot of cases, especially if you've got heavy rain starting on April 26th, poorly drained soils, ponded soils, saturated soils, and that planting window is really very dependent on how much rain did you get, what was the intensity of that rain, and how well drained is your soil. And I've got people that are April 25th is a day that has emerged as a day that a lot of people say, oh, everything planted on the 25th was a disaster. Well, that's not really true. If you had well-drained soils or you didn't get that much rain on the 26th, 25th's fine planting date. And I've got some corn on a wet farm that was planted on the 21st of April that's a mess because it just had too much water on it. So what happens, there's two things that make planting successful. It's good soil conditions, and it's relatively good conditions for at least the first 5 to 7 days after planting. If you can accomplish that, you're in pretty good shape. And those first 2 planting windows had that. They had good soil conditions. They had good conditions after planting. The third window had perfect soil conditions, but awful conditions after planting. As did the fourth window, which was Mother's Day weekend. And how many years in a row, Adam, are we now that Mother's Day weekend's been a bad time to plant corn? Is it 4?
4 years, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're 4 consecutive years where one of the worst times to plant corn was Mother's Day Sunday. Somebody's trying to tell you guys something, and you're not listening. So if you planted, and that's another one, that it depends on how much rain you got. Like, what was it? I think Monday night at the following week. I think you could plant Monday, and then sometime during the day, Monday, it rained.
Yeah, it rained that Monday.
And some places it rained a lot on Monday afternoon, Monday evening. Some places it rained 3/10. Yeah. You know, if you get 3/10 after you plant, life's usually pretty good. If you get 3 inches after you plant, that's not going to end well for you or your new corn seedling. And so again, I keep coming back to drainage. This is one of those years that if you're blessed with naturally well-drained soil, that's great. If you've invested a lot in pattern tile systems, that's great. You know, last year you didn't really need them. This year they're certainly, paying for a good chunk of what you spent on that system. Now, I will say, in most cases where we've had some of the really wet conditions, even if you've got a beautifully patterned tiled field, you probably needed about twice as much tile in that field as what you've actually got to handle the load that was given to it. But those fields still benefited a lot from that tile. But we've got farms with, tiles on 50-foot centers that in between the tile lines, there's some corn that drowned out because you needed tile on 25-foot centers to handle what some of it was given. And, just being able to surface drain that water and get that water off quickly, even though it does a lot of damage when it's leaving the field across the surface quickly, it at least gets it, off the field, which is where it needs to get to if your crop's going to survive. And then the fifth planting window, which on my farm, honestly, is going to be my best stand of corn, because I passed up the first 2. I didn't plant corn in March, and in that second window, I was doing beans. Now, my beans planted in that second window look awesome, and my hope is that those beans are so awesome that they make up for the fact that I wasn't planting any corn during that window. The window after Mother's Day, which I would call that one, that's probably one of the bigger planting windows, like May 18th to May 23rd, depending on where you were and how much rain you had and how well drained your soil is. That was one of the bigger planting windows we've had. And that stuff is all nearly perfect. Now, how much it's going to suffer being a little bit late planted versus how much it will benefit from getting off to a good start, having a good stand, is yet to be determined. The other wild card we don't know on all this is how much crown rot are we going to get in the early planted corn. I would contend that every acre of corn planted before April 25th is pretty ripe to be smoked by crown rot in August and die early. If that happens, some of that early planted stuff may not prove out to be as awesome as it looks today. If you can manage that, and if that doesn't happen, it's going to be pretty tough for anything to beat that early planted corn, because it's got really good stands. It's off to a great start. That stuff's going to flower early. It's going to be growing in the best sunlight period of the summer, and it's going to have a lot of advantages when it comes to grain fill and yield if the roots stay healthy. So on the flip side, I don't think all this corn that got planted after Mother's Day, and in some places most of the corn got planted after Mother's Day, I don't think that stuff's going to suffer as much from plant health issues late season, at least not root related plant health issues. Now, we could have above ground related plant health issues, and we'll talk about fungicide management here in a minute. But and then in some areas, unfortunately, a sixth planting window is required, and we're in that one right now. And there are places that, it's still easy to find unplanted fields. It's easy to find fields that have not been touched, and and we're unfortunately getting close to June. I did look up, ironically, June 1st, if you believe the charts, and there's a lot of data that supports these charts generated by universities, and we've had a couple years here where we've had some really good yields in recent years from late May, even early June planted corn. And you may feel, maybe a little more confident in the ability of early June planted corn to yield than what some of the charts say. But if you follow the chart, June 1st planted corn, you are at 85% yield potential, which, 85% of 250 is a pretty respectable number. 85% of 160, isn't quite so sexy. So it kind of depends on, 85% of what? How bullish are you on what your corn yield potential is? I planted corn in 2019. I planted corn June 11th. That was the last day we planted corn. I was still planting 110-day corn on June 11th, which is about the fullest season corn I'd be comfortable planting on June 11th. And that's pushing it, but I was pushing it on purpose. And it made 210, 215. I was tickled to death with that. That's probably 80, 85% of what it would have done had it been planted more timely. But, we can certainly still raise good corn planted in early June. So if you've been unable to plant some corn, I'd stay with it. I would plant the fullest season corn you think you can get away with. And depending on how you do your calculations, depending on what sort of an adjustment you make for late planting, I would say if you're planting corn June 1st, about a 112, 114 is probably about as full as I would go. Although I did know a customer who planted 70-27, which is 120-day corn, June 3rd in 2019, because they had half a planter of it left when they got rained out back in April. I don't think they planted any corn in May in his area in 2019. And his June 3rd planted 120-day corn matured. Now, was it wetter than hell? Yes, but it did mature, did make grain, did fine. So you can usually, barring an early frost or an unusually cool summer, you can usually get away with more than you think you can. And I always harp on people to plant the fullest season corn that you can stand if you're planting late. Don't plant some 100-day corn because you want it to be dry when you harvest it, or you are worried about an early freeze. That 100-day corn is not adapted to central Illinois, period. And it sure as hell not adapted to central Illinois when you plant it in early June. So the two mistakes I see people make when it gets late in planting is they shift away from their full season corn too early. And when they make the decision to shift away, they don't just go down 4 or 5 days relative maturity. They want to go down 10 or 15 days relative maturity. Don't do that. I would say up till June 10th, I'm okay planting 108, 110-day corn. And I joke with people, once it gets too late to plant, 108-day corn, it might just be too late to plant corn. And you might be better off to switch to beans at that point. And if you've had 20 inches of rain on your nitrogen by that point, you're not really wasting your money on nitrogen because Mother Nature has already wasted your money on your nitrogen. And if you plant corn, you probably need to put on some additional nitrogen anyway because you've lost so much of what you had applied. So hopefully most of Western Illinois is not in this scenario, but you get into parts of Eastern Illinois, parts of Southern Illinois. There are little pockets around the state where there's a lot of acres that have not yet been planted, and some of those guys may be, hoping for the relief that prevent planting will bring. Some of you may be determined, hey, I don't care if it's the 15th of June. I'm not giving up on this thing. I'm going to raise a crop. And I like that attitude myself. I think that's better than letting the government pay you to not plant anything. But depending on the soil, depending on the farm, depending on the circumstances, let economics dictate what you think is the best approach for you. Let's talk a little bit about fungicide management in corn. So I consider there to be 3 fungicide windows in corn. There is the early vegetative stage, which we call V5. We shouldn't call it V5 because it's a wider window than that. I would say V4 to V7 is the window for early vegetative fungicide. And if you got your corn planted before April 25th, I really hope that you have made that application. Now, most of that corn that went in early is almost out of that size window now. So if you wanted to do that, you should have already done it. And I think that would have been wise to get a good fungicide on that corn in an early vegetative stage, just to do everything you can do to try to maintain the root health of that plant later in the season. It's not everyone agrees on the benefits of that early vegetative fungicide in preventing crown rot, and prevent's the wrong word. Suppress would maybe be the strongest term you would want to use. But I've seen situations where it makes a pretty big difference at the end of the season, whether you did that early application or not. So I would have been very bullish or aggressive at getting early fungicide on that early planted corn. Now, the corn that went in after Mother's Day, apologize to my CPFSR counterparts. I'm going to unsell some fungicide here. I wouldn't put an early vegetative fungicide on corn that's been planted in the last 10 days if it was me. I would shift those dollars into a better herbicide program, or I would shift those dollars into a better VTR1 application, which is the second window. So fear not, CP brethren. I'm going to spend that money on something. So we're not taking it out of the budget. We're just going to shift it to a product that maybe would have more benefit. So the second window, and the most important window, if you're going to spray fungicide one time in corn, VT to R1 needs to be the time. And if you're going to spray fungicide one time in corn, I would spray the maximum amount allowed by label, which most of you have never done. Those of you who have done it know that it usually works pretty well. So rate enhancement on fungicide is something that we've learned in recent years, kind of playing around with tar spot and dealing with some difficult to control diseases. We've found that corn really likes that high rate of fungicide, whether there's disease there or not. So if you're going to spray fungicide one time, no matter what anybody says, I'd go for it big time at that VT to R1 growth stage. If you're willing to consider making another application the next time we have a 2021 type of growing season, where we have 3 bad diseases going on in corn. We had bad crown rot that year. We had bad southern rust, and that was still the one and only bad tar spot year we've had in Central Illinois was 2021. We will find tar spot in Central Illinois every year forever, I'm afraid, but 21 was the only year that we've really had it bad. And what made it bad that year was we had good conditions for tar spot infection early in June. We had a crop that was very fully developed early in the season. We had a crop that looked really good. And what tar spot likes is a big developed canopy in June, lots of moisture, and really good corn. If you've got stunted little corn in June, not going to have much tar spot. If you're in a drought in June, not going to have much tar spot. But where you need to worry about tar spot is, and this could be the year for some, if you've got early planted corn, if it's off to a great start, if it looks like $1 million and June is anywhere near as wet as May has been, look out. That's the year that tar spot could get, bad enough early enough that we could see some significant issues from it. And if you're having that kind of year, you do not want to be waiting until R2 or brown silk to spray your fungicide. That is a recommendation that I get very frustrated by. There's a lot of people out there that like to watch the crop and look at disease development and try to time that application. They try to wait as long as they can. The idea being that, well, we've only got a couple weeks residual out of our fungicide. I want to protect that plant through grain fill. And if there's no disease there, I don't want to spray too early. So we have this, I don't know what it is about spraying. Everything we spray, everybody's afraid of being too early. I wish somebody was afraid of being too late with something, because that would be better. So don't be waiting till brown silk to put your fungicide on. If it's going to be a bad tar spot year, by the time you get to brown silk, the plant's already all infected. Even if you can't see the lesions yet, it's already there. And we can't fix tar spot once it happens. The best thing we can do is try to prevent it. And to prevent it, you got to have a good fungicide. You got to have a pretty good rate of a good fungicide, and you got to get the fungicide on before the infection occurs. Now, it is true that tar spot has the ability to infect season long. And in a bad tar spot year, one application of a fungicide, I don't care what rate you use, I don't care how good it is not going to give you season long control of tar spot. So tar spot may be in certain years a 2 application, and this one doesn't count. That one's not for tar spot. That one's for general plant health, yield potential, maybe crown rot suppression, other things. This V4 to V7, it got nothing to do with tar spot. There is zero benefit, in my opinion, to that application preventing tar spot. Even if tar spot gets started early in June, that's still not going to do anything for tar spot. If you've seen early season fungicide applications improve the health of your corn late season, it's for reasons other than tar spot. We get tar spot suppression out of the VTR1 and the R3, R4 if we need it. Now in 21, there were some applications that went on as late as R5 that still showed benefits. I don't recommend ever putting fungicide on that late. Those were kind of Hail Mary desperation situations where guys just wanted to do something, and they got a little lucky and saw it was so bad that year, even if you sprayed too late, there was still a benefit to spraying. But I would contend that if you saw a response to an R5 fungicide application in corn, you would have saw a bigger response to an R3, R4 fungicide application in corn. So all of our fungicides, whether they're corn, soybeans, whatever they are, and regardless of what mode of action they are, whether it's a strobe or a triazole or an SDHI, they all work best preventatively. The curative fungicides, like the triazoles, there's this notion that it can cure a plant that's infected. They really can't. They all work best preventatively. And yes, there are, triazoles can help a plant that is already in the early stages of infection. But if there's a lesion there and you can see it with your eye, that's way past the point that a curative, that we would need a category called resurrective to do anything for a lesion that's already developed. So even if you're relying on triazole fungicides because they're curative, you still got to get them on before the disease has, smoked the plant. Yes, they have a little wider window of application than the strobies do, which are purely preventative. But we sometimes treat curative products like they're resurrective, and there's only been one resurrective thing, and we won't talk about that here on Ask the Agronomist. So one other thing that I forgot to mention too, and I warned you I was going to kind of be jumping around, and I am. It was interesting to me. I noted that June 1st has on average 85% yield potential, and I just happened to notice when I was looking at the chart that if you've got a stand of 20,000 planted essentially anytime in April, that's 84% yield potential. So you're about a wash there, and I know some of you have made some agonizing decisions about replanting in corn, and I hate replanting corn. I spent a day and a half with a 16-row planter planting 23 acres of replant ponds, and 23 acres with a 16-row planter in a day and a half kind of tells you how much driving around I did to fill in those holes. Now, full disclosure, that was in 3 different counties, so there was some road time involved between the farms as well. But it's just I hate replanting corn, and I know most of you do too. So we don't do it for fun. We don't do it when we don't have to, but it's always tough to decide, what's best. And Adam and I rely on these charts to help us make these decisions. The charts are not always right. The charts are not always the gospel. At the end of the day, you have to do what you feel is right. And if you think, well, that's absolute bullshit, I'm not leaving 22,000 plants. I'm going to start over again, even if it's June 5th. You can do that. I would advise you to be prepared for it to yield about the same if you do that, but you can do that. And there are certainly years where 35,000 perfect stand planted June 5th will kick 22,000's butt planted, April 10th, especially if that 22,000 gets some crown rot in it and the 35,000 in June is healthy. So we don't know, but we go off the charts. That gives us a starting point. And then you can make the decision, for yourself from there, what you're going to do. Soybeans are more forgiving of late planting than corn. And the gentleman that I was with just yesterday that was feeling good about the fact that he was planting corn in April instead of beans, he feels a lot better if he has to plant beans the 25th of May than he does planting corn the 25th of May. And I don't particularly think there's that much wrong with May 25th corn, but if you feel there is, and you would rather be planting beans May 25th, well, you need to take that into consideration when you're trying to decide which crop you're going to plant in April. And you got to do what's right for you. You can find situations that will support every decision ever made by anyone. And people tend to do that. They have something that they prefer, and then they look for evidence to support what they prefer. That's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you want to do that, you can always do it. So do what seems right to you. Do what you want to do. Do what's going to enable you to sleep at night. And if that's replanting a stand of corn that somebody else would not have replanted, then replant it. If that's replanting a stand of beans that Adam and I tell you it doesn't need to be replanted, well, go ahead and replant it. It's your farm. You can do what you want. Your seed company will be there to support you. But it's always a judgment call. The later it gets, the more forgiving and the more liberal I get. I don't often describe myself as liberal, but as it gets later, if it's May 1st, I'd tear up 26,000. If it's June 1st, I'd probably leave 20. So it just depends on lots of factors. There's that agronomist's favorite saying, it depends again. But it's certainly been a struggle this year. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are, we overthink things a lot, and there's going to be a lot of people that might tend to overthink what they went through this spring. And if you're really frustrated with something in your operation, there's always a desire to make changes. If what you like to do has been really good for you over the last 10 years on your farm, and it turns out to be lousy this year, I don't know that means you need to do anything different. We change too much stuff based on the year that just happened, and every year is different. This year is weirder than most. Every year is weird in some way. Last year at this time, we thought everything was going to die because it was so dry, and we thought we were starting to worry that, by the, what was it? When was it? June? Was June 29th the
Yeah,
derecho?
yeah. June.
Yeah. So we went all the way, and we were really just now getting into the bad part of last year. I mean, the month of June last year was, I mean, people were just really, really, really down because, man, it was dry. We hadn't had a good rain. We hadn't had a good rain all spring, and it looked like we were 1988, 1989, 1983. I mean, it hadn't been hot like some of those years, but man, it was dry. We had the driest June on record a year ago until June 29th. Ruined my chance to set a record. I was setting at 1/1700ths of an inch of rain for the month of June. That was going to be the driest June on record. Then I got 1.5 inches on June 29th and messed all that up. But also saved our crop. We had good rain through July, good rain through August. And last year was a really, really good illustration that May and June is a damn good time to be dry. What's a damn bad time to be wet? April and May. So that's 2024. So it's, every year is different. Things are starting to look pretty nice, and again, I say pretty nice as I'm being a little bit liberal saying that because, we shouldn't be looking at crops that are only this big now. I'd rather they were bigger, but, we got some really nice stands. We got some good emergence. Most fields have been planted. Most fields were getting sprayed, getting good weed control. I mean, I'm still optimistic for the prospects of this crop. We got a long way to go, but, compared to places that haven't been able to plant yet, we're sitting pretty good here in West Central Illinois. We've got probably some of the best looking crops in the Midwest here in this part of the state, because we have not had as much rain as some people, and we had better early windows than most people did. So I think we should feel pretty blessed at the crop prospects that we've got, but I get it. It's been a struggle. It's been a challenge. Nothing's been easy. You've had all these little planting windows, and if you weren't sitting at the edge of the field ready to jump on some of those windows, you may be kicking yourself now thinking, boy, I really screwed up. But that doesn't mean you need to do something different next year, because next year is going to be different without you doing anything different next year, just because it is. So with that, I don't know if we had anything coming in on the chat, Adam, or
been quiet today.
Yeah, everybody's probably still watching the one that we killed. So, apologize for the technical issues. We'll be back with you when?
On the
13th of July. Lucky Thursday, the 13th of July. We'll be back with you. That would be the day after you finish post spraying dicamba, or June. Sorry, not making off label recommendations there. June 12th.
Yeah, we'll be back on June 13th.
For those of you listening from the EPA, June 12th is the last day to legally apply over the top formulations of dicamba. No more than half a pound. Please use proper nozzles and drift reduction agents and follow all label restrictions. June 13th, the day after that, we'll be back with our next episode of Ask the Agronomist, and hope to hell I got a computer that's functioning. So Jennifer, get on that, and we'll be back with you then. So everybody stay safe, make good choices, and we'll be back with you in 2 weeks. Take care.